everyone. Welcome. I am sitting on top of a big wall today to tell you a story. You'll see why soon. Today we're talking about another superhero in our Bible, just like Esther last week. And we're going to talk a little bit about fear again as well. Well, I'm going to back up a little bit, but we're going to talk about Joshua. See if you remember anything about the story coming up. Well, many of you know the story of Moses and how he led God's people toward the promised land. They had been slaves in Egypt for a long time. Well, Moses followed God's instructions and it led them to the Red Sea, and they were kind of stuck with Pharaoh's army coming up behind them, and they were really scared. But God had a plan. He parted the Red Sea just completely, and the people were able to walk through on dry ground with water on both sides of them. They could probably see the fish on each side even. That was amazing. And they safely got to the other side, and Pharaoh's army didn't make it. Well, Joshua was with them. He was a faithful servant of Moses and, most importantly, of God. Moses led the people to the land of Canaan. But there were some other people living in that land, and they were a little bit curious of how they were supposed to go in. God hadn't shared everything yet. Well, Moses sent 12 spies into the land, and they were supposed to be very sneaky and look around and get some information from Moses. They wanted to know how many people were there, were they afraid, what kind of weapons they had, all kinds of stuff like that. So the spies wandered around, peeking and sneaking around for 40 days. That was a long time, right? They came back so excited. They told Moses about the beautiful land, how it was flowing with milk and honey, and that was just a wonderful place that God had for them. But unfortunately, they told him some other things too. They told him how big the people were and how strong they were, and so people got scared. Caleb and Joshua were two of the spies. Remember, there were 12. And they didn't let those things scare them at all. They suggested they go straight into the land immediately, that they could take them with God on their side. But the people just got scared, and they started whining and whining and whining and whining. Can you believe that? They had been doing that a lot. And so they got to a place where they even wanted another leader, and they were going to go back to Egypt with this new leader and be slaves again. Can you imagine? They were willing to give up their freedom just so that they didn't have to be scared of these people and didn't trust God. Well, Joshua and Caleb warned them not to go against what God had said. In Numbers 14, they tried to remind the people of how God had promised this and told them to come, but they were just too busy whining. God had given them sign after sign after sign and miracle after miracle, but their faith was still too small. Remember how the spies had searched for information for those 40 days? Well, God chose to punish his people for not 40 days, but 40 years. They had to wander around just outside Canaan, the promised land, for 40 years. And not get to go in. He said that none of the grown-ups who had been complaining and refused to do what he said should get to go and live in the land, in that special land, except for Joshua and Caleb, because they had believed. So that's what they did. They wandered around and around, and people got older and older, and the grown-ups all kind of died, and the children got older and had even their own children. Well, Moses died when he was 120 years old, and Joshua became the new leader. But God promised to protect him and told him that he had nothing to worry about. He was going to protect him just like he protected Moses. In Joshua 1:6, God tells Joshua to be strong and courageous, kind of like Mordecai told Esther last week, right? That she didn't have anything to worry about. But he also told them that he needed to remember he was giving them this land, and that all they had to do was obey his laws. So Joshua this time sent in 2 spies. They had to be really sneaky though. And they were hiding, and they hid in a lady's house named Rahab. And it didn't take long though for the king of Jericho to find out there were spies from the Israelite camp in his city. And so they started trying to find them. They were going to capture them. But Rahab hid them on her roof and covered them up. And the officials came knocking on her door demanding for those spies to come out. They wanted to capture them. But Rahab had heard about God and the amazing things that he could do, and she wanted to protect the spies. So she told them, I didn't know who those people were. I sent them away. It's close to the close of the city. And so she said they probably ran out of the gates. So the city of the town of Jericho had a big wall around it. That's why I'm sitting on this wall. And at night they would close the gates so that no one could get in, and there were guards there so that the city was protected. And so Rahab was sneaky all by herself. Well, as soon as the officials were gone, they thought they were going to go catch them somewhere else. Rahab let the spies out and helped them get out of their hiding place. And she talked to them, and she told them that she had heard about God and that she wanted them to protect her and her family when they came to attack, but that she had a way they could get out of the city. Her house was right near the wall in one place, and so she had a window, and she took a rope and she threw it out the window over the city wall, and she lowered them down over the city wall, and they could get out and escape. That was a great plan. But they told her to do something special when as soon as they were gone. They wanted her to hang a red cord in her window so that when they came back, the Israelite army would know to protect her, that that was the special house that they didn't want to destroy, and they didn't want to hurt anybody in it. So the spies got back to Joshua and told them all the good news of what they had seen and how the people inside the city were so scared of the Israelites that God had prepared this for them. So Joshua got everyone ready to finally enter the promised land. The first step, though, is there was this Jordan River that they had to cross, and it was way too deep for people to walk through. So God did something amazing again. Remember how God had parted the Red Sea for the Israelites to walk safely from Egypt, out of Egypt? Well, Joshua and Caleb had seen that, but the other people in the Israelite group hadn't seen it, or they were too little probably to remember, but they had heard that story. But God did the same thing again. The priest took the Ark of the Covenant that carries the 10 Commandments and walked into the Jordan River, and as soon as they stepped foot into the river, it parted again. So all of the people could walk across on dry land and the water beside them. Isn't God amazing? He did it again. So the people started getting across the river, and they built an altar to thank God on the other side. They used 12 special stones from the Jordan River to get across. When they got across, and they built this altar so that they could remind their children later on what amazing things God had done. Well, word spread fast after this happened, and the people in the cities were scared. So Joshua's army was pretty big, but they didn't know if they had enough people. But God doesn't always use the number of people in an army to win a war. He has his own plans. They had never, ever been in a fight. Remember, these were the kids that grew up without battles, and they were adults now and could have, but they didn't know what it was like to go to war. They had just been children. But God continued to do amazing things. He sent a man to Joshua with a sword in his hand. And Joshua realized that it was from the army of the Lord, and bowed down to him and worshiped God. His instructions were for Joshua to do something kind of crazy. And we find out in Joshua 6, God's plan. He was going to conquer all of the people in Jericho, but he was going to do it in a very unusual way. God told him to have all of the men march around the city wall, the whole thing, every day for 6 days, So they weren't supposed to do anything. The priest would carry the ark, And they would carry horns and they would blast the horns. So the people inside the city would know something special was going on, and they were getting more and more scared. But they thought they were safe inside and protected by the walls. And they just walked around for 6 days, psyching out their enemy. Well, on the 7th day, there was a new plan. God told Joshua to have 7 priests to carry the trumpets and have all the people walk around the city with them 7 times. So the Israelites were ordered to do this. They were supposed to walk quietly behind the priests. The priests blew their trumpets, and the people were not to say a word. And they did this 7 times. And when they got done with the 7 times, the priests were supposed to make a really long sound with their trumpet and blow really hard. And the people were all supposed to shout then. They had been quiet those 7 times around the wall, but this time they were supposed to shout as loud as they could. And shout, and they were given the reason because the Lord had given them this city. Only Rahab and her family were going to be protected. The Israelites were told to collect all the silver and gold when they were able to get in the city, the bronze and the iron, anything really valuable. But that was all they were given as instructions. They didn't know what was going to happen. So the Israelites did just what they were told. They marched quietly, and then they shouted. Do you know what happened? The walls came tumbling down just from their voices. The people yelled, and the giant protective walls fell down. Unbelievable. The 2 spies went back, and they went to Rahab's house because they knew where it was, and they got Rahab and her family out safe and took them back to the Israelite camp just so nothing would happen to them. Do you know what the Israelites learned in all of this? Something that we know too. God always keeps his promises. Always. Do you know the Israelites still forgot about that sometimes? And sometimes they forgot about the wonderful and amazing things God had done for them. You know, I still sometimes forget that too, even though I can read all of these stories and I have stories of my own that God's done for me. They sometimes still turned away from God and sinned, but God always found a way to get their attention. I'm so glad he finds a way to get my attention too, and he will for you because he loves you that much. I hope that you will be inspired to be strong and courageous like Joshua and like Esther this week, just like them, and that you will remember, more importantly, that Jesus loves you more than you can imagine. Have a great week. Hi everyone, welcome back to the lab. I'm so excited that you're here. I have a great experiment for you. So I have this candle, and it reminds me of how Jesus is called the light of the world. And he really is. But you know what? He calls us to be a light for him as well. That means that we're supposed to serve him and tell others about Jesus. Maybe that means your family, your friends, your neighbors, everyone. So I'm going to light these because we are supposed to be a light to others as well. And we'll talk about that. So last week, we talked about Esther as one of our superheroes, right? Well, she could have been very afraid of what Mordecai was asking her to be. She could have been killed for just asking the king to save people's lives. Doesn't that sound crazy? But it's true. But she didn't let her fear overtake her. She prayed and she fasted and she followed God's plan, the one he gave her. Remember, many people ended up coming to know God when they heard everything that had happened, including hearing about Mordecai and Esther's faith. fear did not stop her. Well, today we learned about Joshua. He was not afraid either. He trusted God to deliver his people to the promised land. And he argued this with the Israelites. But they let fear win, at least for a while. Fear is sometimes invisible to those around us. We might feel it very strongly, but others might not know that we're afraid. But it might keep us from doing what we're supposed to do. For example, what if God wanted you to be on the basketball team? Well, maybe there are some other players that needed you to be their friend or needed you to tell them about Jesus, and being on the team together would give you that chance. But you're too scared to try out. You don't want to be turned down. That'd be frightening, wouldn't it? Or maybe it's just that life is really hard right now and you're scared that it always will be, or that you're just not strong enough. That fear might keep you from doing what you're supposed to and finding your special purpose. This is true for adults too. But we know that the candle represents Jesus. And let's say that maybe this one right here that's closer to me, it represents Joshua. Remember that he was another one of our superheroes. He trusted God to keep his promise. And the other candles can be some of the other Israelites. There were a lot. Well, God had promised them that he would give them the land. So you'd think, oh, that's a done deal. Everybody would believe that, right? But they were afraid of the people who lived there. Maybe they were a little bigger. Maybe they were scarier. Let me show you how powerful some invisible things could be, just like fear is sometimes invisible. I put this backdrop up just so you could see the flame a little bit better. Sometimes on the video, I know it's hard to tell. So I didn't want you to think I was doing any tricks though. Okay, this is amazing just how it is. So all I've done is put some baking soda in this measuring cup, and I just poured some in. I didn't even measure it. And I'm going to pour some vinegar in, and I'm going to quickly cover it up so that the gas, which is invisible, stays inside the cup the best as possible, right? Okay, so you can see the foam is kind of going down. I'm not going to pour the liquid on it. That would put out the fire, right? I'm not though. I'm going to use what's invisible. I'm not even touching it. Let's see if I can do another one. There's enough gas. Let me move this one closer so I can see it. Let's see if I can do another one. I can. No liquid got into my candle. Okay, the same amount is still there. The gas that's invisible to us made the lights go out. So that's sad, right? That the Israelites' lights went out. They weren't sharing about God's promises and God's love because they were having trouble with their own faith, right? So we have the same lesson to learn too, that if we let something like fear burn out our light, we might not get to find out our purpose. What a waste. The Israelites didn't believe Caleb and Joshua the first time, and they had to wander around in the wilderness for 40 years. That's crazy, right? Because they didn't trust God to bring them through again. Well, I hope that you will pray and that you will study God's word this week, and that you will remember that God always keeps his promises. Always. When we understand that and we trust God to help us and protect us and guide us in the right direction, we don't have to be afraid. I hope that you'll remember that this week. And I always hope that you remember that Jesus loves you more than you can imagine.